Lorenzo Vallo stepped into room 512, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and a balloon that read, "Hip hip hooray." The door clicked shut behind him. Blood still stained the cuff of his tailored suit from an earlier conversation that had gone poorly. His associate Nico was supposed to be recovering somewhere on this floor after taking a bullet meant for him. But the person lying in this bed wasn't Nico. She was a woman, maybe in her early 30s, with hair the color of autumn leaves fanned across a thin hospital pillow. Her skin had that translucent quality you only see in people who've been sick for too long. Tubes snaked from her arms to machines that beeped in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The room felt wrong. Not because he was in the wrong place, but because it was so devastatingly empty. No flowers sitting on the windowsill. No cards taped to the walls with messages of hope. No photographs of smiling faces to remind her why fighting mattered. Just sterile white walls, medical equipment, and silence so thick it felt like abandonment had taken physical form. She turned her head slowly and her eyes met his. They were hazel, shot through with gold, and they held something Lorenzo hadn't seen in years of running an empire built on fear. Genuine warmth. A small smile touched her cracked lips, the kind of smile that shouldn't exist on someone this sick. "I think you've got the wrong room," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow steady. "But those are beautiful. I haven't seen sunflowers in months." Lorenzo Vallo had broken men twice her size without blinking. He'd made decisions that changed the landscape of the city's underworld. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. But standing there with ridiculous flowers and a cheerful balloon, looking at this dying woman who was being kind to a stranger who'd barged into her room, something cracked inside his chest. He should have apologized, backed out, found Nico's actual room. Instead he walked further in. "Then I guess they're yours now," he heard himself say. The balloon bobbed stupidly as he set it on the chair by her bed. He placed the sunflowers on the rolling table, pushing aside an untouched Jell-O cup and a plastic water pitcher. She stared at them like he'd just handed her the moon. "I'm Emma," she said, her fingers reaching out to barely touch one of the yellow petals. "Emma Mitchell. And you've just made my entire week, mystery man with the wrong room number." Lorenzo opened his mouth to give her the name he used with civilians, the safe one, but what came out was the truth. Lorenzo. What he didn't tell her was that he'd walked into that room expecting to find a soldier. What he found instead was something far more dangerous. A reason to care. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that mistake, would unravel everything he'd built and give him something he didn't know he was missing. A life worth living. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand just how alone Emma Mitchell really was, and what her husband had done to her while she was fighting for her life. That part of the story will make your blood boil. Then you'll understand why a man like Lorenzo, a man who solved problems with violence and intimidation, decided this woman was worth burning his entire world down for. Stay with us. This isn't just about a mistake or even about love. This is about what happens when the wrong person walks through the right door at the exact moment someone needs saving. And trust me, by the time we tell you what Emma whispered to Lorenzo 8 months later at an altar, you'll believe that some mistakes are actually destiny wearing a disguise. Like and subscribe if you're invested and turn on notifications to stay updated. Back to the story. Lorenzo should have left immediately. Every instinct he'd honed over 15 years of running the Vallo family operations told him to get out, find Nico, and forget this ever happened. But his feet refused to cooperate. Emma was still touching the sunflowers like they might evaporate if she stopped making contact. Her fingers trembled slightly, whether from illness or emotion, Lorenzo couldn't tell. The balloon drifted lazily above the chair, its cheerful message suddenly feeling appropriate in a way it hadn't been meant to be. "I'm sorry for barging in," Lorenzo said, and he genuinely meant it. The words felt foreign in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd apologized to anyone. Emma shook her head, still smiling. "Don't be. Honestly, you've given me the first surprise that didn't involve needles or bad news in 3 months." She gestured weakly at the empty walls around them. "As you can see, I'm not exactly drowning in visitors." The statement hung in the air, not bitter, just matter-of-fact. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He'd noticed the absence of people the moment he walked in, but hearing her acknowledge it made it worse somehow. Family? He asked before he could stop himself. Emma's expression flickered just for a second, but Lorenzo had built a career on reading faces. That flicker told him everything. Complicated, she said, which was the kindest way anyone had ever said, they abandoned me, without using those exact words. She adjusted herself slightly on the pillow, wincing. My husband finds hospitals depressing. He visited once after my diagnosis, said the smell bothered him. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. Lorenzo's hands curled into fists before he consciously relaxed them. The blood on his cuff suddenly felt appropriate. And friends, he pressed, not sure why he was prolonging this conversation but unable to stop. Emma laughed, a soft sound that turned into a small cough. Turns out terminal illness is a great way to find out who your real friends are. Spoiler alert, I apparently didn't have any. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, counting down moments that suddenly felt precious. Lorenzo pulled the chair closer and sat down, something he definitely hadn't planned on doing. The balloon bounced beside his shoulder. The flowers aren't much, he said. But they're yours. The balloon too. Emma's eyes glistened, and for a horrifying moment, Lorenzo thought she might cry. He had no idea what he'd do if she cried. Men who owed him money crying he could handle. This felt entirely different. They're everything, Emma whispered. You have no idea what it means to have someone walk through that door with something beautiful instead of pity. Lorenzo understood pity. He'd seen it on people's faces when his father died, when his mother followed 6 months later. He'd hated it then and he hated it now. No pity here, he said. Just a guy who can't read room numbers apparently. That earned him another smile, this one brighter. Well, I'm glad you can't. Best mistake I've ever been on the receiving end of. Lorenzo glanced at his watch. He'd been in this room for maybe 10 minutes. Nico was probably wondering where he was. The business that had put blood on his sleeve still needed handling. But looking at Emma surrounded by sunflowers, her face lit up in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights, Lorenzo made a decision that would have shocked every person who knew him. I should go, he said, standing. But would it be all right if I came back? Emma's eyes widened. You'd want to come back? To visit me? Unless you'd rather I didn't, Lorenzo offered, suddenly uncertain. No. Emma said quickly, then softer. No, I'd like that. I'd like that very much, Lorenzo. He nodded, committing her room number to memory. How he'd mixed it up with Nico's 542 he'd never know. Or maybe he would. Maybe some part of him, the part that wasn't hardened by years of violence and control, had needed to end up exactly here. Tomorrow then, he said. Tomorrow, Emma agreed, still clutching a sunflower petal between 2 fingers. Lorenzo walked out of room 512 feeling like he'd just signed a contract he didn't fully understand. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing something that had just begun. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just made the most important wrong turn of his entire life. Lorenzo showed up at room 512 the next afternoon carrying a bag from the bakery 3 blocks from his office. The same bakery his mother used to take him to every Saturday morning before the world got complicated. He'd asked for chocolate chip cookies, still warm, the kind that looked homemade even though they weren't. The girl behind the counter had given him a curious look when he specified they needed to be soft, not crunchy. Lorenzo didn't explain that hard cookies seemed cruel for someone who probably struggled to eat most days. He knocked this time, which felt strange. Lorenzo Vallo didn't knock on doors. Doors opened for him, usually held by someone paid to anticipate his arrival. Come in, Emma's voice called out, stronger than yesterday. She was sitting up when he entered, her autumn hair pulled back in a messy braid. Someone had finally brought her real pajamas instead of just the hospital gown. They were covered in tiny moons and stars. Her face lit up when she saw him, like she genuinely wondered if he'd actually return. You came back, she said, and Lorenzo heard the relief buried under the surprise. Said I would, he replied, holding up the bakery bag. Brought reinforcements. Emma's eyes went to the bag with the kind of longing usually reserved for things far more valuable than cookies. What kind? Chocolate chip. Still warm. You're going to spoil me, mystery man. Lorenzo pulled the chair to its now familiar spot beside her bed. The sunflowers were still there, bright against the white room, but someone had put them in an actual vase. The balloon had deflated slightly, listing to one side. "Mystery man?" he asked, opening the bag. The smell of butter and chocolate filled the sterile air. "Well, you haven't told me what you do," Emma pointed out, accepting the cookie he offered. "Just that your name is Lorenzo and you have terrible navigation skills." He almost laughed. If she only knew. "Import-export," he said, which was technically true if you counted weapons and information as imports and exports. "Sounds boring when I say it out loud." Emma took a small bite of the cookie and closed her eyes like she was tasting something holy. "This is incredible. I haven't had real food in forever." She chewed slowly, savoring it. The hospital stuff tastes like sadness shaped into nutritional requirements. That did make Lorenzo laugh, a real one. "That's the most accurate description of hospital food I've ever heard." They sat in comfortable silence while Emma worked through half the cookie. Lorenzo noticed she ate like someone who knew their stomach might rebel at any moment. Small bites, long pauses. "So what did you do?" he asked eventually. "Before all this." Emma's expression shifted into something wistful. "I illustrated children's books. Mostly fantasy stuff, dragons and magical forests and brave little kids going on adventures." She gestured vaguely at her frail body. "Ironic, right? I spent years drawing characters who conquered impossible things, and here I am losing to my own cells." Lorenzo had expected maybe teacher or nurse, something sensible. An illustrator felt both surprising and perfectly fitting. "That's not ironic," he said firmly. "That's just life being unfair, which it usually is." Emma tilted her head, studying him. "You sound like you know something about unfair." "Everyone does, eventually." She didn't push, which he appreciated. Instead, she finished her cookie and brushed crumbs from her moon and stars pajamas. "I had a studio apartment in Brooklyn. Terrible lighting but cheap rent. I'd work late into the night with my cat, Pumpkin, sleeping on my desk." Her voice carried the weight of a life that felt very far away. "Where's Pumpkin now?" Lorenzo asked. Emma's face fell. "My husband said he took her to his sister's place. Said it was temporary until I got better." The way she said, "got better," made it clear she knew better wasn't coming. Lorenzo filed away another mark against this husband he'd never met but was rapidly learning to despise. What kind of man takes away a dying woman's cat? "Tell me about your favorite project," he said, steering away from dangerous territory. "The one you're most proud of." Emma's eyes brightened again. "There was this book called The Girl Who Planted Stars. About a kid who thought stars were seeds and tried to grow them in her garden." She smiled at the memory. "I painted every illustration by hand. Took me 4 months. The publisher said it was my best work." "What happened to it?" "Published 2 years ago. Won some awards. Made enough money that I could quit my waitressing job and just draw." Her voice grew softer. "I was working on the sequel when I got diagnosed. Never finished it." Lorenzo watched her face, saw the grief for dreams interrupted. "Maybe you still could," he offered. Emma looked at him with those hazel gold eyes, kind but realistic. "Maybe. But probably not." The machines beeped their relentless rhythm. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching dust particles floating in the air. Lorenzo made another decision that would have baffled anyone who knew him. "Tell me the story anyway," he said. "The sequel. Tell me what happens." Emma blinked in surprise. "You want to hear a children's story?" "I want to hear your story." Something passed between them then, something neither of them named. Emma settled back against her pillows and began to speak, her voice painting pictures her hands might never get to create. Lorenzo listened like it was the most important briefing he'd ever received. Because somehow sitting in that hospital room it was. Lorenzo visited every day for a week before Emma finally told him about Mark. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of gray day that made the hospital room feel even more claustrophobic. He'd brought her sketch pencils this time, professional-grade ones from an art supply store in Manhattan. The saleswoman had helped him pick out a set that would be easy to grip for someone with shaking hands. Emma had cried when she opened them, actual tears streaming down her face. "You have to stop being so thoughtful," she'd said, wiping her eyes. You're going to ruin me for normal human interaction. Lorenzo had just shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. They'd spent an hour with Emma showing him basic shading techniques, her thin fingers guiding his much larger ones across paper. He'd drawn a lopsided circle that was supposed to be an apple. She diplomatically called it abstract. That's when her phone rang. Emma glanced at the screen and her whole body went rigid. I should take this, she said quietly. It's my lawyer. Lorenzo stood to give her privacy, but she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Stay, please. So he stayed, watching her face cycle through emotions as she listened to whoever was on the other end. I understand, Emma said finally, her voice hollow. Yes, thank you for trying. She hung up and stared at the phone like it might bite her. The silence stretched so long that Lorenzo almost broke it himself. Mark got the apartment, Emma said eventually. My apartment, the one I paid for with my book money before we even got married. Her hands were trembling now, and not from the illness. He filed for divorce 3 weeks after my diagnosis. Did I tell you that part? Lorenzo's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. No, you didn't. Emma laughed, but it was a broken sound. I was in the middle of my second round of chemo. Losing my hair in clumps, throwing up everything I tried to eat, and he served me papers in this exact room. She gestured around them. Said he couldn't handle watching me deteriorate. That he'd signed up for a wife, not a patient. Lorenzo's hands curled into fists. He'd hurt people for far less than this. The lawyer said because I was too sick to contest things properly, and because Mark moved fast with a better attorney, he got almost everything. Emma's voice was eerily calm now, the kind of calm that comes after you've cried all your tears. The apartment, our savings, even the rights to negotiate my book royalties since they're considered marital income. That's not legal, Lorenzo said, his voice dangerous. Emma shrugged. Apparently it is when you sign papers while hopped up on pain medication and trusting your husband to be fair. She picked at the blanket covering her legs. He left me with medical debt, this hospital room, and whatever personal items he deemed worthless. Your cat? Lorenzo said, understanding hitting him. He didn't take Pumpkin to his sister's, did he? Emma shook her head. Took her to a shelter. I found out last week when I finally got someone to check. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She was adopted 3 days later, which is good, but I didn't even get to say goodbye. Lorenzo stood abruptly, needing to move before he put his fists through the wall. He paced to the window, staring out at the city below. People were going about their normal lives, completely unaware that in room 512 he was learning exactly what kind of monster wore a wedding ring. Where is he now? Lorenzo asked, his voice carefully controlled. Mark, where does he live? Emma wiped her eyes. Why? You going to beat him up for me? He meant it as a joke. Lorenzo didn't. Where, Emma? She must have heard something in his tone because her eyes widened slightly. Lorenzo, whatever you're thinking, don't. He's not worth it. That's not what I asked. They stared at each other and Lorenzo watched her work through what he was really offering. He moved into a condo in Tribeca, she said finally. With his new girlfriend, someone from his office who doesn't come with medical bills or expiration dates. The bitterness in her voice was the first genuine anger he'd heard from her. Everything else had been acceptance, resignation, forced optimism. This was rage finally surfacing. He gets to play house in my apartment money while I'm here dying alone, Emma continued, her voice rising. He gets to move on like I was just an inconvenience, like 3 years of marriage meant nothing the second I stopped being convenient. She was breathing hard now, monitors beeping faster. And the worst part? The absolute worst part is that I still hope he'll visit. How pathetic is that? Lorenzo returned to the chair and took her hand. It's not pathetic. It's human. I hate him, Emma whispered. I hate him so much and I hate myself for still caring. Then stop caring, Lorenzo said simply. Let me handle it. Emma looked at him searchingly. Handle it how? Lorenzo smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. You let me worry about that. But I promise you, Emma Mitchell, Mark is going to regret every single thing he's done. She should have been scared. Any reasonable person would have been. Instead, Emma squeezed his hand back. Okay, she breathed. Okay. Lorenzo left the hospital that Thursday evening with a purpose that felt almost cleansing. He had people to call, arrangements to make, a husband to educate about consequences. But first he needed to make sure Emma understood something fundamental. He returned 2 hours later carrying takeout from an Italian restaurant his family had owned 3 generations back. The kind of place that didn't deliver for anyone except Lorenzo Vallo. Emma was asleep when he arrived, her face peaceful in a way it never was when she was awake. The sketch pencils he'd brought were scattered across her bed table and she'd drawn something on the paper. Lorenzo picked it up carefully. It was a rough sketch of sunflowers in a vase, the lines shaky but unmistakably beautiful. In the corner she'd written in delicate script, "For Lorenzo who walked through the wrong door." Something in his chest constricted painfully. He set the drawing down like it was made of glass and settled into the chair to wait. Emma stirred 20 minutes later, blinking in confusion at the darkened window. "What time is it?" "Almost 8, Lorenzo said. "I brought dinner. Real dinner, not hospital sadness." She sat up slowly, wincing. "You came back. Twice in one day. Get used to it." Lorenzo opened the containers, filling the room with the smell of homemade marinara and garlic bread. "I can't eat all that," Emma protested, but her eyes were locked on the food. "Then eat what you can." They ate in comfortable silence, Emma managing half a plate before her stomach called it quits. Lorenzo had seen her appetite over the past week. This was actually progress. When she finally pushed the container away, Lorenzo set his own food aside. "I need to tell you something." Emma tensed. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least I don't think it is." Lorenzo leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to find words for something he'd never said to anyone. "You told me today that you're alone. That Mark left you, your friends vanished, your family is complicated." Emma nodded, not meeting his eyes. "That's all true. It's not true anymore." She looked up then, confusion crossing her features. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not alone, Emma. Not anymore." Lorenzo held her gaze, making sure she understood he wasn't just being polite. "I'm going to be here. Every day. After work, during lunch, whenever you need someone." "Lorenzo, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently. "I want to." "There's a difference." Emma's eyes were getting that glassy quality again. "Why? You barely know me. I'm just some random sick person you stumbled into." "You're not random and you're not just some person." Lorenzo struggled with how much truth to give her. "You're someone who deserves better than what life has handed you. And I'm someone who can actually do something about that." A tear escaped down Emma's cheek. "I don't understand you. You show up out of nowhere with flowers and cookies and promises. People don't just do that." "I do." "But why?" It was a fair question. Lorenzo had been asking himself the same thing for a week. Why this woman? Why no? Why did walking into the wrong room feel like the first right thing he'd done in years? "Because when I walked in here last week, you smiled at a stranger who barged into your room," Lorenzo said slowly. "You didn't ask questions or demand explanations. You just saw someone with flowers and decided to be kind." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've spent a long time in a world where kindness is weakness and trust gets you killed. Then I meet you dying in an empty room, abandoned by everyone who should have stayed, and you're still kind." Lorenzo shook his head in wonder. "That's rare, Emma. That's worth protecting." He was crying openly now. "I don't feel worth much of anything these days." "Then I'll remind you until you believe it." Lorenzo reached across and took her hand, her fingers impossibly small in his. "Every single day I will be here. You won't eat alone, you won't sit in silence, you won't wonder if anyone cares." His voice was firm, the same tone he used when making promises he intended to keep. "I will show up. Rain, snow, apocalypse, I will walk through that door." "What if I get worse?" Emma whispered. "What if I'm not good company anymore?" "Then I'll be here anyway." "What if I die?" The machines beeped their rhythm, marking time neither of them could stop. "Then I'll be here until you do," Lorenzo said simply. "And I'll make sure you're not afraid when it happens." Emma pulled her hand free but only to cover her face as she sobbed. These weren't sad tears exactly. They were the kind of tears that come when someone offers you something you'd stopped believing existed. Lorenzo let her cry, knowing sometimes that was the only appropriate response to being seen. When she finally composed herself, Emma grabbed a tissue and blew her nose unceremoniously. You're either the best person I've ever met or completely insane. Probably both, Lorenzo admitted. She laughed through her tears. Hey, you can come every day. But only if you promise to let me teach you to draw better than that tragic apple. Deal. Lorenzo stood to leave, gathering the empty food containers. Same time tomorrow? I'll be here, Emma said, gesturing at the room. Not like I'm going anywhere. Good. Neither am I. He walked to the door then turned back. Emma. Yeah. You're not alone anymore. I need you to believe that. She nodded, clutching the blanket. I'm starting to. That was enough for now. Lorenzo left room 512 with a promise hanging in the air, one he fully intended to keep. Every single day, no matter what came next. Dr. Williams walked into room 512 on a Monday morning carrying a tablet and an expression Lorenzo couldn't quite read. Emma had been stable for 3 weeks since the fever incident, but stable and improving were two different things. Lorenzo had learned not to hope too hard. Hope was dangerous in places like this. He was teaching Emma how to play poker with a deck of cards he'd brought, using chocolate kisses as betting chips. She was terrible at bluffing, her face giving away every hand. It was endearing in a way that made his chest hurt. Emma, Dr. Williams said, his voice careful. Lorenzo, do you have a moment? Emma immediately tensed and Lorenzo reached over to squeeze her hand. They'd been through enough medical updates to know that careful tone could go either way. What's wrong? Emma asked, her cards forgotten. Actually, nothing is wrong. Dr. Williams sat down in the second chair Lorenzo had bullied the hospital into providing. I wanted to review your latest blood work with you. He pulled up charts on his tablet, numbers and graphs that meant nothing to Lorenzo but everything to Emma's survival. We ran a full panel on Friday, more comprehensive than usual because we wanted to establish a new baseline. Emma nodded, her fingers tight around Lorenzo's. And? Dr. Williams looked between them, and Lorenzo saw something he hadn't seen before. Wonder. Your cancer markers are undetectable. The words hung in the air like they were afraid to land. What does that mean? Lorenzo asked when Emma seemed incapable of speech. It means there's no evidence of active cancer in her system. Dr. Williams smiled, a real smile. Emma, you're in remission. The room went absolutely silent except for the machines that had kept vigil for months. Emma stared at the doctor like he'd spoken a foreign language. That's not possible, she whispered finally. The last scan showed progression. You said I had maybe 6 months and that was 4 months ago. I know what I said. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression almost apologetic. Emma, I've been practicing oncology for 23 years. I've seen remissions before, but this is different. He gestured at his tablet. Your tumors haven't just stopped growing. They've shrunk significantly. Some have completely vanished. How? Emma's voice cracked. Honestly, I don't have a complete medical explanation. Dr. Williams looked genuinely puzzled. Sometimes the body just decides to fight back. We've adjusted your treatment, you've had good support, reduced stress. His eyes flicked to Lorenzo meaningfully. All of that contributes. But this level of turnaround? It's exceptional. Emma was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. So I'm not dying? We're all dying eventually, Dr. Williams said gently. But you're not dying right now. We'll need to continue monitoring, run regular tests, maintain some treatment protocols. He set the tablet aside. But Emma, you get to make plans again. Real plans. Future plans. Lorenzo felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening to a room he'd kept locked. Emma turned to him, her face a mess of tears and shock and something that looked like hope. Did you hear that? I'm not dying. I heard. Lorenzo's voice was rougher than he intended. Emma laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. I get to live. I actually get to live. She threw her arms around Lorenzo's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. He held her carefully, aware of how fragile she still was despite the miracle they'd just been handed. Dr. Williams excused himself quietly, leaving them alone. Emma pulled back eventually, wiping her face with the blanket. I need to call someone. I need to tell. She stopped, reality crashing back. There was no one to call. No husband, no friends, no family that cared. Just Lorenzo. You'll tell me, Lorenzo said firmly. And I'm telling you that this is the best news I've heard in my entire life. Emma studied his face, something shifting in her expression. Why do you care so much? Really, Lorenzo? Why you? It was the question she'd asked before in different ways. Lorenzo had always deflected, made jokes, changed the subject. But sitting there, holding this woman who'd just been given her life back, he couldn't hide anymore. Because I'm in love with you, he said simply. Emma's eyes went wide. What? I'm in love with you, Emma. I have been for weeks, maybe since that first day when you smiled at a stranger and asked about his flowers. Lorenzo ran a hand through his hair, suddenly nervous in a way he never was. I know the timing is terrible. I know you're married technically. I know I'm probably the last complication you need. Lorenzo. But you asked why I care, and that's why. He met her eyes directly. I would burn down my entire world for you. Actually, I'm in the process of doing exactly that. Emma blinked. What does that mean? It means I've made choices in the last month that my business partners think are insane. I've turned down opportunities, refused contracts, walked away from money. Lorenzo laughed without humor. I've built my entire life around power and control and winning, and none of it matters compared to sitting in this room with you. He gestured at the space around them. This horrible hospital room with the uncomfortable chair and the machines that never stop beeping, this is where I want to be. Because you're here. Emma was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything, Emma. I just needed you to know. Lorenzo stood, suddenly needing distance. You're going to live now. You get to figure out what that looks like. And if I'm part of that, I'll be grateful. If I'm not. Stop talking, Emma interrupted. Lorenzo turned back to find her standing on shaky legs, holding the bed rail for support. Emma, sit down, you shouldn't. I said stop talking. She took an unsteady step toward him. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. I just found out I'm not dying and you just told me you love me and my brain is complete chaos. Another step. But I know that for 4 months you've been the only person who showed up. The only person who saw me as more than a tragedy. She was directly in front of him now, looking up with those hazel gold eyes. So if you're in love with me, Lorenzo Vallo, then you're just going to have to be patient while I figure out how to be a living person again. Emma reached up and touched his face, her hand trembling. Because I think I might be falling in love with you too. Emma was released from the hospital 3 weeks after the remission diagnosis. Lorenzo arranged everything from the discharge paperwork to the private car that would take her to the apartment he'd secured in her name. Not the old apartment Mark had stolen. Something new, something that belonged only to her. A fresh start in every sense. She didn't know about the apartment yet. Or the other arrangements he'd made. Emma was sitting on the hospital bed in real clothes for the first time in months. A soft blue dress that hung loose on her still thin frame. She looked nervous and excited and terrified all at once. I don't know how to be a regular person anymore, she admitted, fidgeting with the hem of the dress. What if I get out there and forget how normal life works? Lorenzo was packing the last of her things. The sketch pencils and cards and small treasures that had accumulated over 4 months. Then you'll remember. And I'll be there while you figure it out. Patricia knocked on the doorframe carrying a folder. Emma, we need to settle your account before discharge. Emma's face went pale. Lorenzo had been expecting this. How much? Emma asked, her voice small. Patricia opened the folder, clearly uncomfortable. With insurance covering what they do, your remaining balance is $127,418. The number landed like a physical blow. Emma actually swayed. That's impossible. That can't be right. I'm sorry, honey. Extended stay, specialized treatments, the ICU week when your fever spiked. Patricia looked genuinely pained. The billing department has already set up a payment plan if you need it. Minimum monthly payments of $1,200. Emma laughed, high and brittle. $1,200 a month. I don't even have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. I don't have anything. Yes, you do, Lorenzo said calmly. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Yeah, it's me. Send the payment now. Full amount. He rattled off an account number from memory. Lorenzo, what are you doing? Emma asked. Taking care of it. Taking care of what? He ended the call and looked at Patricia. Check your system. The payment should be processing now. Patricia looked bewildered but pulled out her tablet. Her eyebrows shot up. Mr. Mitchell, I'm showing a wire transfer for the full balance. It just cleared. Emma stood abruptly. No. Absolutely not. Lorenzo, that's over $100,000. I'm aware. You can't just pay that. I already did. Emma's hands were shaking. Why would you do that? That's insane. That's too much. Lorenzo set down the bag he'd been packing and walked over to her. Emma, sit down. We need to talk. I don't want to sit down. I want you to explain why you just dropped a fortune on my medical bills like it was nothing. Because it is nothing compared to what you're worth. Patricia quietly excused herself, sensing this was a private conversation. Emma waited until the door closed. That's not an answer. People don't just pay off six-figure debts for people they've known for 4 months. I'm not people. Lorenzo guided her to sit on the bed, then pulled the chair over. There are things about me I haven't told you. Things I should have explained before now. Emma's eyes narrowed. What kind of things? The import-export business I mentioned? That's not the whole truth. Lorenzo took a breath. My family runs operations in this city. Lucrative operations. Legal on paper, complicated in practice. He watched her process this. I have money, Emma. More money than I know what to do with. Your hospital bill wouldn't dent my accounts if I paid it 10 times over. Emma was very still. What kind of operations? The kind that required me to be someone I'm not proud of. Lorenzo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But here's what you need to know. I'm done with that life. I've been done since the day I walked into your room. You can't just walk away from something like that. I can and I am. Lorenzo pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. What's this? Open it. Emma's hands trembled as she unfolded the papers inside. Her eyes scanned the text, confusion growing. This is a lease agreement. For an apartment in Brooklyn. 2-bedroom, good light, pet-friendly. I had my lawyer negotiate it. It's in your name, first year paid in full. Emma's head snapped up. Lorenzo. There's more. He pulled out a second envelope. Bank account also in your name. Enough to live comfortably while you recover and figure out what comes next. How much is enough? 200,000. Emma dropped the papers like they burned. Are you out of your mind? You paid my hospital bills and got me an apartment and just casually opened a bank account with $200,000. Actually, it was closer to 400 total, but who's counting? I am. I'm counting. Emma stood again, pacing. This is crazy. People don't do this. You don't just throw money at someone like they're a charity case. You're not a charity case. Lorenzo's voice was firm. You're the woman I love and you were drowning in debt from trying to survive. So I fixed it. You can't fix everything with money. No, but I can fix this. And I did. Emma stopped pacing, her arms wrapped around herself. Why? Just tell me why you're doing all of this. Lorenzo stood, closing the distance between them. Because I told you I was leaving my old life and I meant it. I've spent years building an empire that meant nothing. Accumulating power for the sake of power. He touched her face gently. Then I met you and suddenly I understood what I was supposed to be building toward. A life that actually matters. With someone who makes me want to be better. Tears were sliding down Emma's cheeks. You barely know me. I know you better than anyone I've ever met. I know you're kind to strangers. I know you make terrible jokes when you're nervous. I know you cry at greeting card commercials. Lorenzo smiled. I know you take your coffee with too much cream and that you're allergic to strawberries. I know you hum when you draw and that you talk to plants like they can hear you. That's not enough to upend your entire life. It's everything. Lorenzo wiped her tears with his thumb. Emma, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises. I'm just asking you to let me be part of your future. What about your business? Your family operations? I have people handling the transition. I'm out within 3 months. And then what? Lorenzo smiled. Then I figure out who Lorenzo Vallo is when he's not trying to be a king. Emma looked at him for a long moment. You're serious? You're actually walking away from everything? For you? Yes. She laughed through her tears. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Probably both. Emma reached up and kissed him. It was soft and tentative and tasted like salt from her tears. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's figure out the future together. Lorenzo pulled her close. Best decision you'll ever make. We'll see about that. But she was laughing now, holding on to him like he was an anchor. Maybe he was. 8 months after Lorenzo walked through the wrong door, he stood in the hospital chapel wearing a charcoal suit and holding a bouquet of sunflowers. The chapel was small, tucked away on the first floor where most people never ventured unless they were desperate for divine intervention. Stained glass windows cast colored light across worn wooden pews. It wasn't grand or elaborate. It was perfect. Emma had wanted to get married here in the place where everything had changed. Lorenzo would have married her anywhere, but he understood the significance. This hospital had been her prison and her salvation. The place where she'd been abandoned and then found. Where she'd prepared to die and instead learned to live again. Nico stood beside Lorenzo as best man, still walking with a slight limp from the bullet he'd taken months ago. The bullet Lorenzo had been visiting him for when fate intervened. You know this is insane, right? Nico muttered, adjusting his tie. You, married in a hospital chapel to a woman you met because you can't read room numbers. Lorenzo smiled. Best mistake I ever made. Still can't believe you walked away from everything. I didn't walk away from everything. I walked toward something better. The chapel door opened and Patricia walked in, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She'd become something like family over the months, checking in on Emma even after discharge, celebrating each clean scan. She's ready, Patricia announced, her voice thick with emotion. And she looks absolutely beautiful. Dr. Williams appeared next, looking uncomfortable in a suit instead of his usual white coat. He'd agreed to walk Emma down the aisle since her own father had declined the invitation. His loss, Lorenzo thought coldly. Marcus, the night nurse who'd brought Lorenzo countless cups of coffee during the dark hours, slipped into a pew. He gave Lorenzo a thumbs up. The small gathering was rounded out by a handful of Lorenzo's former associates who'd survived his transition out of the family business. Men who'd learned to respect the boss who chose love over power. A pianist Lorenzo had hired began playing, something soft and hopeful. Then Emma appeared in the doorway. Lorenzo's breath caught. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that skimmed her body, which had finally regained healthy curves. Her autumn hair was loose around her shoulders, threaded with tiny white flowers. No veil, no train, no elaborate ceremony. Just Emma, glowing with life and happiness, walking toward him with a smile that could light up the entire city. She'd come so far from the dying woman in room 512. Her color was back, her eyes bright, her laugh genuine. She'd started illustrating again, working on the sequel she'd thought would never exist. She'd adopted a cat from the same shelter where Pumpkin had gone, a scraggly orange thing she'd named Marmalade. She'd built a life worth living. And somehow, impossibly, Lorenzo got to be part of it. Dr. Williams walked her down the short aisle, his expression proud. He placed Emma's hand in Lorenzo's and whispered, "Take care of her." "Always," Lorenzo promised. The officiant, a hospital chaplain who'd heard their story and insisted on performing the ceremony for free, began speaking. Lorenzo barely heard the words. He was too busy looking at Emma, memorizing this moment. Her hands were steady in his, no tremors, no 4 lines. Just warm, living, healthy hands holding onto him like he was precious. The couple has chosen to write their own vows, the chaplain announced. Emma went first, her voice clear and strong. Lorenzo, 8 months ago you walked through the wrong door carrying flowers meant for someone else. She squeezed his hands. You saw someone dying and decided she was worth staying for. You showed up every single day when everyone else walked away. Tears were gathering in her eyes, but she pushed through. You paid debts you didn't owe, made promises you didn't have to keep, and loved me when I couldn't even love myself. Her voice wavered. You gave me a reason to fight when I'd already given up. You made me believe in futures again. Emma took a shaky breath. So I promise you this. I will spend every day of whatever time we have making sure you never regret walking through that door. She smiled through her tears. I will love you fiercely and completely. I will show up for you the way you showed up for me. I will remind you every single day that choosing love over power was the bravest thing you've ever done. Lorenzo had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. Emma, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Big ones. The kind that hurt people and left scars. He looked directly into her eyes. But walking into room 512 wasn't one of them. Meeting you was the first thing I got absolutely right. His thumb traced circles on her hand. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that being vulnerable takes more courage than being feared, and that the best version of myself is the one who loves you. Lorenzo's voice roughened with emotion. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. In sickness and health already feels redundant since we've done that part backward. That got a watery laugh from Emma and several guests. I promise to keep bringing you sunflowers and chocolate chip cookies. To sleep in uncomfortable chairs if you need me to. To be your person the way you became mine. He leaned closer. I promise to build a life with you that's worth the miracle of your survival. Because you didn't fight this hard to live just to exist, Emma. You fought to really live. And I'm going to make sure we do. The chaplain was blinking back tears himself. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Lorenzo, you may kiss your bride. Lorenzo pulled Emma close and kissed her softly, aware of their small audience but not caring. She kissed him back, her arms around his neck, and he could feel her smiling against his lips. When they broke apart, she whispered something only he could hear. Thank you for the wrong door. Lorenzo laughed, pure and happy. Best navigation failure of my life. They walked back down the aisle together as the small gathering applauded. Patricia was openly sobbing into Marcus's shoulder. Dr. Williams looked satisfied, like he'd just witnessed his best work. Nico shook his head in amused disbelief. As they stepped out of the chapel into the hospital corridor, Emma stopped. What is it? Lorenzo asked. She looked around at the sterile hallways, the fluorescent lights, the distant beeping of machines. I hated this place for so long. It represented everything I'd lost. Emma turned back to him. But this is where I found you. Where I found myself again. Where I learned that endings can actually be beginnings. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. So thank you, St. Michael's Hospital. 4 terrible coffee, uncomfortable chairs, and wrong room numbers. Lorenzo wrapped his arm around his wife. His wife. The word still felt surreal and perfect. Where to now, Mrs. Vallo? Emma grinned. Home. Our home. To start the rest of our lives. They walked out of the hospital together into afternoon sunlight. Somewhere behind them in room 512, a new patient was probably settling in. Maybe scared, maybe alone. Lorenzo hoped they got their own wrong door miracle. Everyone deserved one. 3 years after the hospital chapel wedding, Lorenzo stood in his backyard watching Emma paint in the garden. Not just any garden. A sea of sunflowers that stretched across half an acre, their golden faces tracking the Colorado sun. They'd moved to Boulder 18 months ago, drawn by mountains and clean air and the kind of quiet that only existed far from cities built on secrets. Lorenzo had sold everything tied to his old life. The penthouse, the business interests, the reputation that had once defined him. He'd walked away clean, taking nothing but Emma and a future that felt impossibly bright. Now he ran a legitimate security consulting firm, boring and legal and exactly what he needed. Emma had set up a studio in the converted barn, where she spent her mornings bringing magical worlds to life. Her sequel to The Girl Who Planted Stars had been published 2 years ago to critical acclaim. She was working on the third book in the series now, though progress had slowed recently for the best possible reason. Emma shifted on her stool, one hand unconsciously resting on the swell of her belly. 7 months pregnant and still insisting she could work in the garden despite Lorenzo's protests. She'd compromised by letting him set up the easel and bring her water every 20 minutes. "You're hovering again," Emma called without turning around. "I'm observing," Lorenzo corrected, walking over with a fresh glass of lemonade. "That's just hovering with better vocabulary." She accepted the glass anyway, smiling up at him. The sun caught in her hair, which she'd cut shorter last year. It curled around her face now, streaked with lighter shades from all the time spent outside. She looked healthy, vibrant, alive in a way that still made Lorenzo's chest tight with gratitude. "How's she doing?" Lorenzo asked, placing his hand over Emma's on her stomach. As if in response, their daughter kicked firmly against his palm. "Active today. I think she's practicing soccer in there." Emma set down her brush and leaned back into Lorenzo's arms. "Dr. Chen says everything looks perfect. All the scans are normal, all my blood work is clean." "I know. I was there." Lorenzo had attended every single appointment, just like he'd promised 3 years ago. He'd held Emma's hand through the fear that came with every test, the worry that her cancer might return. But scan after scan came back clear. Emma Vallo was healthy, thriving, and growing their miracle baby. "I still can't believe we get this," Emma said softly. "A house, a garden, a baby on the way. After everything, we get the happy ending." "You deserve it." "We deserve it," Emma corrected. "You fought for this life as hard as I fought for mine." Lorenzo kissed the top of her head. "Speaking of which, Nico called. He and Sarah want to visit next month. Meet the baby when she arrives." Emma laughed. "Your former enforcer has gone completely soft. He sent me 3 different links to organic baby food makers. Father had changed him. Their son is 2 now, walks all over him. Good. Everyone should get their chance at soft." Emma turned in his arms, studying his face. "Do you ever miss it? The old life, the power, the control." Lorenzo didn't even have to think about it. "Not for a second. That life was empty, Emma. I just didn't know it until I had something real to compare it to." He placed both hands on her belly. "This is everything. You, our daughter, sunflowers and Boulder. This is what I was supposed to be building toward all along." Emma's eyes glistened, hormones making her cry at everything lately. "You're going to make me ruin my painting with tears." "The painting is already beautiful. You could stop now. It's for her nursery. It needs to be perfect." Lorenzo looked at the canvas, a dreamy landscape of stars growing in a garden, tended by a small girl with autumn-colored hair. Their daughter's first inheritance, a world painted by her mother's hands. "It's already perfect," he said. "Just like everything else you create." Emma stood carefully, Lorenzo immediately supporting her elbow. "Smooth talker. That's how you got me into this condition in the first place. I believe you were equally responsible for that." They walked slowly toward the house, Emma's hand in his. The sunflowers swayed in the breeze behind them, a reminder of where they'd started. Wrong flowers for the wrong room that became exactly right. Inside, the nursery was ready, painted a soft yellow with hand-drawn murals covering the walls. Stars and flowers and magical creatures, all from Emma's imagination. A rocking chair sat in the corner, the same one Lorenzo's mother had used with him. One of the few things he'd kept from his past. 3 more weeks, Emma said, looking around the room. "Then she'll be here." "Are you scared?" Lorenzo asked. Emma considered this. Terrified. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that comes with something worth being afraid for. She squeezed his hand. "We're going to be parents, Lorenzo." The dying girl and the mob boss who walked into the wrong room. Former mob boss. Still counts. Lorenzo pulled her close, careful of her belly. "We're going to be amazing parents. You know why?" "Why?" "Because we already know how to show up. We already know how to fight for what matters." He kissed her forehead. And we know that the best things in life come from the mistakes you're brave enough to embrace. Emma smiled against his chest. Like walking into room 512. Like walking into room 512, Lorenzo agreed. Outside, the sunflowers turned their faces toward the setting sun. Inside, a former crime lord and a children's book illustrator held each other in a nursery painted with stars. And somewhere between the mountains and the garden and the life they'd built from ashes and miracles, they'd found something most people spend their whole lives searching for. A love worth surviving for. A future worth fighting for. A family born from the beautiful collision of wrong doors and right moments. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning with mountains visible through the hospital window, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Hope. Because that's what she was. Evidence that even in the darkest rooms, even when you're dying alone, even when everything seems lost, hope can walk through the door carrying sunflowers and change your entire world. Lorenzo held his daughter for the first time and understood completely. This was what he'd been made for. Not power or fear or control. But this. Love in its purest form. Emma watched them from her hospital bed, healthy and happy and alive, and thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Sick, abandoned, waiting to die in room 512. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. But she'd want to. And that would have been enough to keep fighting. The wrong door had led to everything right. Sometimes that's how miracles work. They show up unexpectedly, carrying flowers meant for someone else, and decide to stay. Lorenzo walked into room 512 with blood on his hands and left with a heart full of hope. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest mistakes are often just destiny in a clever disguise. If this story reminded you that it's never too late to change your life, or that one act of kindness can save a soul, please hit that like button. It helps these messages of hope reach the people who need them most. What was your room 512 moment? Have you ever made a wrong turn that led you exactly where you were supposed to be? Drop a comment below. I read every single one of them. And if you want more stories that prove miracles are real and love is the greatest power on earth, subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't let the world make you cynical. Stay for the miracles. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next wrong door you walk through might just be the one that leads you home.